difference is that our GE program has become effortless. With 45 units easily in the bag, our students can still attain honors even if they perform less ably in their major courses. I do not know if this is true. But if it is, the fault is ours, and ours alone. Have some of us succumbed to the market orientation that in order to attract students and sustain departmental access to, say, equipment funds, our GE courses must also be easy to pass? Are the learning materials we developed, including those that apply educational technologies, too simple, too remedial, that we sacrifice substance for form? Do the GE readings challenge our students? And do the exams we subject our GE students to test their ability to think critically, to be creative, to write coherently, to argue on the basis of sound judgment, and so on? The strength of the GE program is its ability to challenge. And that is, or ought to be, the source of its attractiveness. Whenever I cringe at my students' essays, and I can see the creatures around here, some of you, whether written in Filipino or English, they tell me that one reason they didn't learn to write in UP is that when their papers or exams are returned, all they see is a number. No indication whatsoever is written about what the number actually means, about which part of the essay is poorly argued or badly written, and why. So they repeat the same mistakes because they pass those courses anyway, until they get to me. I tell them that at the senior level, it is a little too late for me to undo what they have internalized, even as I apply the weapon of fear, followed by horrifying grief upon reading their first draft. What strategy could possibly address this problem? First, I propose we take a look at our methods courses and then work backward in terms of the knowledge and competencies we expect our students, our majors, to acquire along the way. We can do this in clusters of disciplines, although given the transdisciplinary nature of knowledge, it would be more instructive perhaps to hold discussions across fields. Second, let us review the GE program along the lines I noted above. Third, I strongly urge the administration to bring UP into the network of universities that do CPR, Calibrated Peer Review, an online self-learning tool developed by UCLA that began in chemistry because American educators were alarmed that science majors didn't know how to write. CPR exposes a student to excellent reading material. I took a look at some of them. Teaches the student how to read the article, and finally, how to tell whether an essay is well or badly written. Hence the term calibrated peer review. As its website explains, CPR, and I quote, enables frequent writing assignments even in large classes with limited instructional resources, and actually can reduce the time an instructor now spends reading and assessing student writing, end quote. What we should work on is our own web-based tool for writing in Filipino. Alternatively, although this could be costlier, there is the model of the University of Cape Town in South Africa, which has a writing center. They call it the Center for Higher Education Development, where students are sent and then in groups are guided to rewrite their essays. The center also deals with remedial problems in numeracy. Faculty at the center work full-time and, like any other faculty, are expected to do research in their field in addition to mentoring students. Finally, and this is where we as an institution have been remiss, we need to make public our expectations of basic education. I do not suggest this as a guide to passing the UPCAT, but as a response to the changing demands on pre-collegiate education arising from the pace of knowledge creation with which we are most familiar. If we inform the Department of Education in schools about rising expectations, the more committed ones will hopefully strive to meet them. It is difficult to speak about remedial education apart from the question of access, since there is a positive correlation between income and UPCAT score. The higher the applicant's declared annual income category, the higher the subtest scores, except in test items in Filipino. Tempting as it is to shy away from the question, access goes to the heart of our purpose as a public university, a purpose that is being debated elsewhere in the world. Posed by a professor who teaches at both Oxford and Stanford, I quote, "The fundamental question, call it the Oxford question, underlying all the others is this: can we in Europe have social justice in higher education and world-class research universities? Or must we choose?" Cambridge professor Richard argues that it is wrong for government to look upon universities as, quote, engines for promoting social justice. She explains, and I quote, "We try to reach out to the best students, whatever their background. One outcome of that is that we can help to promote social mobility. But promoting social mobility is not our core mission. Our core mission is to provide an outstanding education within a research setting," end quote. And yet, this year, Cambridge announced that the proportion of students it admitted from state schools rose to 59%, the highest since 1981. State schools educate 93% of all English students. Oxford, for its part, applied a new procedure this year that takes into account the applicant's neighborhood: poor, middle income, wealthy. Mike Nicholson, the university's director of admissions, undergraduate admissions, explains why, and I quote, "We want to make sure that we are not missing pupils because we are using A's at GCSE, that's their secondary education, on their own, without more information about the context within which they were gaining those grades," end quote. Achieving top grades under difficult conditions, Nicholson maintains, suggests high potential. Quote, "Using grades alone," he says, "is too crude. I want to make sure that if students are applying from places that have very few people progressing into higher education, we recognize that they are breaking the mold," end quote. I find it paradoxical that as elite universities in the UK are changing admissions policy to take in poorer students, we in UP have taken the opposite route. Dissatisfied with the affirmative action component of the previous admission scheme, because among others, it did not discriminate among high school grades, Diliman opted to correct high school grade inflation by pegging school marks to the UPCAT score. The high school grade, which is supposed to indicate student diligence in learning over a stretch of time, has thus been merged with the UPCAT, a one-time measure. Two students with identical high school grade averages, previously a 1-to-1 correspondence, can now be assigned entirely different marks depending on the UPCAT performance of the school's graduates. This adjustment index, which can be equal to, greater or less than 1, is, according to proponents, a truer, more accurate measure of student merit. However, as Professor Claude Steele, Psychology Department Chair at Stanford University, points out, scores on standardized admission tests are also inflated. by such advantages as private school training, admission test review classes, access to computers and books at home, and so on. In short, advantages enjoyed by children in better off families. It is thus no surprise that 93 of the 100 schools with the highest UP adjustment factor in 2008 are private, while 70 of the bottom 100 are public, excluding the science schools. The adjustment index, then, is also an indicator of affluence or lack of affluence. By correcting one sort of inequity, have we not created or aggravated another? In a way, our problem with social inequity is like that of deteriorating basic education. We are at the receiving end of both and are powerless to change the reality that precedes entry into UP. One could argue that it is not the university's job to cure the ills of basic education or to reduce social inequity. Perhaps so, but neither is it ours to make policy or to take action that will keep qualified entrants at a remedial level or that reinforces inequity or punishes those with less. In all the discussions we have had on admissions, there is one thing we entirely overlooked, and that is the relationship between merit-based admissions and the purpose of the university. William Bowen, an economist, president of Andrew Mellon Foundation, and before that, president of Princeton University for 16 years, explains, and I quote, "The starting premise of admissions is that a school has an obligation to make the best possible use of the limited number of places in each entering class so as to advance as effectively as possible, the broad purposes the school seeks to serve. Within the very real limits imposed by the fallibility of any selection process of this kind, a school should try hard to be fair to every applicant. But the concept of fairness itself has to be understood within the context of the obligations of a university. Accordingly, in making these difficult choices among well-qualified candidates, considerations other than just test scores and high school grades come into play," end quote. These considerations, in turn, are premised upon not just the qualities of individual students, but also, Bowen adds, the shared features of an entire group of students who, by their common characteristics, enrich the learning environment and bring into it the diversity that is an indispensable part of university life. As a Princeton graduate remarked, and I quote, "People do not learn very much when they are surrounded only by the likes of themselves." And this is true. Before I entered UP, I was exposed to only private school students, having studied in Catholic schools since kindergarten. My father, himself the product of private education, insisted we children study at UP, precisely so that we would meet people from all walks of life. A few years ago, De La Salle University tracked down its star scholars, that's the equivalent of our oblation, who had declined admission. One reason they cited for choosing UP was our heterogeneous population, in contrast to La Salle's elitist character. But I think the question before us is not that a diverse student population offers immense learning opportunities to everyone all around, but rather whether UP values this diversity enough to count it among its purposes. If UP does, then merit in admissions would take on additional meaning beyond the rigid convention of high grades and test scores. If, on the other hand, this is not our purpose, then we can end all discussions on admissions.